Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Illinois Policy Unpacked podcast, where we inform the policy conversation in Illinois and beyond. I'm your host, Kristen Chandler. Today, I'm joined by Rick Funderburg, a professor at the School of Public Management and Policy at the University of Illinois Springfield, and Paula Worthington, senior policy advisor at the Civic Federation and lecturer at the Harris School of Public Policy at the University of Chicago. The COVID-19 pandemic upended public transit and the justice system, slashing ridership and fare revenue. Now, as federal support for transit runs out, Illinois systems face an uncertain future. In this episode, we'll discuss Rick and Paula's analysis of Illinois' transit budget gap and policy considerations to tackle this challenge moving forward. Rick and Paula, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Kristen.
Happy to be here.
Happy to have you both. Let's start first with ridership. Public transit ridership shifted dramatically during the pandemic. How did Illinois compare with national trends?
Well, that's an excellent question. Well, first off, Illinois is a pretty diverse state. So I'm gonna start by describing or comparing what's happened in the Chicago area to what's happened to the nation. The Chicago area, in brief, has lagged in ridership recovery to the nation as a whole. U.S. bus ridership, in particular, is right now about 83% of the pre-pandemic levels, while bus ridership in the Chicago area, particularly with CTA, is about 76.5%. And then with the PACE suburban bus ridership is at about 63.5% of pre-pandemic levels. So we're seeing, a significant difference between bus ridership in the Chicago area and bus ridership in the nation as a whole. That difference is even more stark when we compare rail ridership. When we look at heavy rail ridership in particular, at the national level, it's about 75% of pre-COVID levels, while with the CTA-L trains and the Metra inbound suburban trains running at about 60% of pre-pandemic levels. So there's quite an enormous difference in ridership recovery in Chicago compared to the nation as a whole. If you look to downstate Illinois, which of course doesn't have rail, but is restricted to bus, downstate looks more like the national averages.
Okay, so Chicago ridership is a little bit lower compared to national, but downstate Illinois is about the same as national trends, it sounds like.
Yes, that would be true.
Awesome. So you touched a little bit on the differences between train and bus ridership. What drove those changes that with the trends Illinois has right now?
Bus ridership, fell less during the pandemic and has recovered more fully compared with rail. And that's the same nationwide as we see in the Chicago area. And what in particular is driving that is the same factors that drove it during the pandemic. Is we saw essential workers continue to use the systems, especially those workers in service industries that had to use had to go into work during the pandemic. Also, buses. The reason buses have recovered more so than rail is that they tend to serve lower income riders that don't have as many work from home options. And also, of course, bus riders tend to not own cars, so they have less flexibility in that regard as well.
Okay, and train riders tend to have cars at higher rates? Is that what you're saying?
Particularly the suburban train riders, like the Metra riders, not necessarily the core rail, which is the CTA and elevated riders. They tend to not have cars either.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. Beyond COVID-19, what challenges continue to threaten transit ridership recovery?
the number one factor is remote work. And this is something I emphasize in all of my talks, is we have reached a plateau in really the trends towards returning to work since the pandemic. So we've seen a flattening out in returning to work. And alongside that flattening out of return to work, we've seen basically a flattening out of ridership. So we're no longer seeing additional gains. So the remote work issue, particularly with high income workers that can work from home and have that flexibility, we have that continued problem where there's no guarantee they'll ever come back to pre-pandemic levels. Alongside that have been what we would call supply side issues with these services, with both bus and train. A lot of the supply side issues, speak to why riders choose to not use the particular services. Sometimes they have concerns about personal safety. Sometimes they have concerns about their security and, of course, crime. So those issues remain as well. And then a related issue is the overall service quality in terms of how reliable and frequent is the service, and this particularly affects buses. And there's been some ongoing staffing problems as well, trying to provide excellent services. So there's both the supply side and then the demand side with the reduction in ridership due to working from home.
Interesting. And are any of those perceptions of ridership founded fears like crime for public transit, or is that more of a perception?
There are some documented higher levels of actual crime incidents in for the CTA, and we cover some of that in our policy brief. So some of it does appear to be real, but on the other hand, there also have been very real responses by the RTA in various investments in security measures. So there has been, I don't want to sound like there hasn't been an effort. There have been efforts as well, but we do see some real differences, or where the experienced crime levels and incidents are higher.
Okay, interesting.
I would just add that one key ingredient to improving both actual and perceived safety, personal safety in the transit world, means putting more riders on the buses and the trains. Ooh. That's really what you need. When you look at what happened during COVID, what you saw was ridership collapse, and the number of sort of serious violent crimes that were reported as occurring, that didn't really come down much. And so you need people. So it's, you need a well-funded system providing, as Rick was saying, appropriate measures of security and electronic this and cameras that, and security personnel deployed throughout the system. But you need riders.
All right. The RTA recently projected a $771 million budget gap for fiscal year 2026, which was up from $730 million from just 2 years ago. What could happen if legislation isn't passed to close this gap?
So I'd be delighted to take a swing at that. One thing to keep in mind, of course, is that estimate was prepared some time ago, and more up-to-date estimates might be somewhat less daunting. In the Chicago region, sales tax revenues have come in stronger than perhaps anticipated, and because sales taxes provide a material form of funding for the system, that means that the gap itself may not be quite as large as was estimated a year or so ago. So that's one point. A second point is simply to say that the RTA, the Regional Transportation Authority, has directed the CTA, PACE, and METRA to prepare its fiscal year 2026 budgets under two scenarios. One of those scenarios is under the assumption that additional state funding is not going to materialize. And so the agencies themselves are going to have to engage in a mix of strategies to close that gap in 2026 and in the years that follow. An alternative scenario would be one in which additional funds are forthcoming, relieving the pressure on the transit agencies. So what are the agencies going to do if they don't get that additional funding? It seems pretty clear that they're going to implement a mix of strategies. They will implement fare increases. They will engage in certain cost efficiency programs in order to save money. And they're going to have to cut service. They're going to have to limit something about how many routes, the frequency of service, the time of day, days of week that certain kinds of service will be provided. All of those dimensions will be put under pressure in a scenario in which the agencies do not receive additional state support.
Awesome. Thanks for clarifying that context before. With the number may be different today in the budget gap. But Paula, you mentioned that the fare box might increase and then service may be limited. Public ridership dropped, but there are still users today. Would those type of things affect the transit users that are still continuing to use services today?
Sure, that's a great question. Rick alluded to some information that helps us think about that in the form of surveys conducted of frequent users, infrequent users, or non-users of transit. What do we know about how people would respond to changes in fares, cuts in service, and things of that nature? One thing we know is that no one likes increases in taxes or fares. But it is also well understood that for a lot of transit users, they really prioritize reliable, predictable, relatively efficient transit service. And having to pay a little bit more for that in the form of a fare increase is not necessarily the end of the world. And it should be sort of noted that fare increases in the Chicago region have been limited and intermittent over the last 10 to 15 years. I believe the CTA last raised its fares in 2018. There's been a material amount of inflation since that time, cost of labor, cost of energy, cost of materials, all of that has gone in only one direction. Transit agencies throughout the country have already implemented some modest fare increases. Metra has also, in our metro region, done some of this, but they did it through a fare structure simplification effort. Bottom line is that for our local agencies here in the Chicago region, the average fare revenue per trip has fallen over the last few years. You know, we think about paying $2 or $2.50 to ride the bus or the train, but another way of thinking about it is, on average, how much in fare revenue do the agencies collect for a given passenger trip? Because people buy passes and some people are riding on reduced fare programs and things like that. And that number has come down. And so I think the RTA has told the service boards that they need to propose fare hikes, a system of fare increases to generate at least $50 million in recurring annual revenue with their budget proposals for next year.
Interesting. So it sounds like it's a little tougher to make higher fare increases if there's been a long time where they haven't been increases. This kind of reminds me of the Illinois motor fuel tax, where they waited many, many years to up it. And then once there was a change, it was pretty dramatic. And a lot of people are talking about it. So it sounds like almost an incremental increase from year to year would make it a little more digestible for people.
That's a very good point. I have read proposals that would do exactly that. Like whatever the level is, you make this one-time adjustment, and then going forward, you have some relatively automatic way of moving a bit with inflation and so on to avoid the earthquake pricing that sometimes people refer to.
I haven't heard that term. Thanks for sharing that. You've both outlined immediate and long-term policy solutions for the RTA. Could you walk us through those briefly?
Sure, I'll take a swing at that one. So in the short run, I think we've really already talked about a number of the options that the RTA and really agencies across the country can be looking at. You can raise fares. That's an immediate way to generate additional revenue, knowing that you'll deter some riders. But on net, you'll make things a little bit better. You can cut service, or a more positive way of framing that would be to think about it as right-sizing service. You're really trying to build on what you've learned since the pandemic. We have very different work and travel and commuting patterns now. And so is it time to take those new patterns more into account when developing your train schedules, your bus route network, and things of that sort? I think that's something that will happen. I mean, a short run answer for the RTA in any event would be for it to simply raise its sales tax rate. And there are many advantages of doing that, because the RTA already has the authority to do it. It's not hard logistically to make it happen, but there are a lot of reasons to think you don't want to do that. Sales tax rates are already very, very elevated in Northern Illinois. And I think that's not a direction that I think is likely to be followed at this point. I think we are going to see, ultimately, I think we'll see things like the fares, the right sizing service. We might see some additional public funds coming through the state itself, through the public transportation fund support that it provides. We're going to see potentially some revenue streams from this broader notion of transportation system users. I do think we'll see pressure on capital budgets. People will say, well, I wanted to rehab this one thing, but I'm going to defer the maintenance, defer the rehab, and instead take those resources and use them in the short run to prop up the operating budget. So I definitely think we're going to see some of those things happen. In terms of the long run, I guess what I would highlight is that some of what people talk about in the long run has implications not just for transit funding, but for other aspects of public finance, for our other local governments, city, county, and so on. So for example, one big idea, of course, would be to make big change in our sales tax structure in Illinois and try to bring more services into the sales tax base. You could imagine a world in which you did enough of that might allow you to actually lower the rate at which you were taxing those transactions. But that is a very long run proposition, and it's not something that is going to solve our fiscal operating gap, in the next year or two. I think Rick kind of alluded to this a little bit when he mentioned New York, but long run, if you think about transit agencies and what they have is very sort of privileged, monopolistic, if you will, access to space and facilities and guideways and so on. And how do they make the most of that space? This is related to transit-oriented development, but it's also about value capture. It's about ways in which the transit system has these precious assets and can figure out a way to build on the value and to monetize those assets in some way. I'm not talking about privatizing something per se or selling off an asset, thinking about it more as, you know, these transit systems own some very special assets, and it would be, I think, long game, great to see them get more creative in figuring out how to get that value elevated for them. So I think those are pieces of this, and underpinning all of it, honestly, it comes back to what I said a few minutes ago that links ridership and finances. Any policies or programs, short run or long run, that enhance and encourage ridership are going to contribute to solving our fiscal problems for transit.
Great. Thank you so much for walking us through those options for tackling the transit, some policy solutions for the RTA. We hope today's conversation shed light on the current state of Illinois transit funding. A special thank you to our guests, Rick Funderburg and Paula Worthington, for sharing insights and potential policy solutions as transit faces reduced funding. Stay tuned for more episodes that help shape the policy conversation in Illinois and beyond. Until next time, thanks for listening.